Now, just to explain very quickly again, 16-year-old Colleen Burrows is raped and brutally murdered by two mongrel mob associates in 1987. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was a Brookfields Bridge just around from where I lived that crime happened. One of her murderers ended up in prison for over 30 years, but incredibly, it was awarded almost $18,000 in compensation for having his rights infringed when he was in prison. He's been since let out of prison after 31 years inside. The family of Colleen Burrows, the little girl that was murdered, and particularly her mum, appealed under something called the Victims' Special Claims Tribunal for a claim against, a particular claim against Colleen Burrows' killer for the emotional harm that Tahai, the murderer, had committed upon the family as a consequence. And some of that included the mongrel mob intimidating and harassing the family after, can you believe it, Colleen Burrows was killed. Now, it was knocked out by the High Court, who argued that it was all covered by ACC, even though it wasn't. Went to the Court of Appeal, and that's when our next guest gets involved, Nikki Pender, who is an outstanding barrister based in Auckland, I think, at the Kate Shepherd Chambers. Welcome to the show, Nikki. That's right, aren't you, at the Kate Shepherd Chambers?
Well, I'm Kate Shepherd, which is actually a whole New Zealand-wide chambers. I'm based in Wellington.
You're based in Wellington. Okay. And congratulations, by the way, upon this particular case. Explain to me, please, and to all of us, how the system works so that if a prisoner commits or you can take a claim under a particular piece of legislation against a criminal who has caused you harm. Is that correct?
So if we go back about 20 years, what corrections did, there were a whole lot of very difficult, dangerous prisoners. They put in place this regime, a special regime to manage them. That was then taken to the court where breaches of Bill of Rights were claimed, and there was a test case brought, and it was successful, and actually quite a large sum of compensation was awarded then. So Parliament...
This is to the prisoners.
This is to the prisoners for breaches of Bill of Rights.
Yep.
So, and there were a lot of them, so it was potentially going to be pretty major. So Parliament stepped in and it enacted this act. So on the one hand, it still allows these Bill of Rights claims to be brought by prisoners, but it keeps the compensation relatively modest, but enables that to be done. But it then gives the victims the right to claim against that compensation to a tribunal. The key with that, though, it doesn't give the victims the right to that compensation. That right has to exist already in the law, at the common law. So for people where it's a rapist, the offender was a rapist, it's actually relatively straightforward. They can usually claim what we call exemplary damages, even though there's ACC, and that's relatively straightforward. Where it gets tricky is where there's been a homicide, and for many of these offenders who were subject to that particular program, I mean, they were in there for murder, because we've got, through a whole lot of reasons, and very complex, if you've read the judgment, it's actually very complex, it's very difficult to get a cause of action by a family member for wrongful death. It was even before ACC that the circumstances were very narrow. That you could do it for maybe pecuniary loss. That means, if you've lost somebody, the breadwinner, and suddenly, the father's gone or the mother's gone, and for the children. But it was always very, very narrow. Then with ACC, it sort of pretty much extinguished that. And so it's one of these issues that comes back to me, because I do act for a lot of victims. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I'm criminal adjacent in the sense that I've acted for victims now for probably the same length of time, about 20 odd years. And I actually acted for Ida Hawkins, Colleen's mum, way back in 2007 when she was appearing before the parole board, when Sam Tahai kept coming up and wasn't suitable. So I knew Ida for a long time. So yeah, you're right. So that came. So Ida had this. Sam Tahai was awarded compensation. The Act suspends what some people might know, that there's normally a limitations period. Normally, if you have a claim, only within a certain time. But the Act said, well, while the people are in prison, that doesn't run. So it's actually, it runs once they're released. So she had this claim. She was notified. She put the claim in. We actually got $15,000 by the tribunal. The tribunal had no problem awarding it to her. But then on appeal to the High Court, they said, well, we've got this problem. You don't really there doesn't seem to be a recognised right for you to claim against, even though it is the person who murdered your daughter. There doesn't seem to be a right either for compensation or exemplary damages of people. What exemplary damages are, again, another sort of like nice little legal term. But what that actually means, it's this sort of damages that's focused not on the injuries, so it's not compensatory, but it's on the conduct. The conduct is so egregious and so reprehensible that damages are awarded in a civil case, not criminal, in civil, and they're awarded just to sort of basically denounce that conduct. So they're a special claim of damages for exemplary damages, but you have to have a right to claim in the first place to claim exemplary, and that's where we came up. So the law's in a bit of it's always been in a bit of it's been really messy in this area. It makes no sense. And so the Court of Appeal have pretty much recognised that. They've sent it back to the tribunal for one small matter. It's possible that because Colleen's mother and family and her siblings who were younger, they were traumatised and they were intimidated by the mongrel mob, there may be a claim for nervous shock that might then entitle that, but that's got to go back to the tribunal. It's going to be really, really expensive because the court said we're going to need expert evidence. I mean, Ida Hawkins died after we went to the Court of Appeal before the judgment came out. We're going to need that. We're going to need an oral hearing. Both sides are going to be heard. And this little system that Parliament set up with this tribunal, which was supposed to be actually really quite cheap and efficient, looks like it's actually going to be blown out. So at this stage, we're not sure what we're going to do. It's early days yet. We've only just got the judgment. So one of our decisions is whether or not this is something that should go to the Supreme Court or Parliament should be looking to change it. Might be a mix of both, but it's too early to tell you what's going to happen there.
It seems from the outside that this is, every piece of arcane manoeuvring that the law is sadly acquiring a reputation for. Isn't it really? Because Nikki, it's over $15,000. It should be simple. You're right. The legislation that goes back, I think it was the Prisoners and Victors Claims legislation. I remember it now. Helen Clark brought it in after a series of prisoners being awarded extraordinary sums for the alleged breach of their rights while they were in prison. And I remember Helen Clark having a lot to say on this particular issue at the time.
Yeah.
But it's $15,000, and you're saying that they were originally granted that sum by the particular body set up to investigate those claims. It was then overturned by the High Court. It's now gone to the Court of Appeal, and it could end up in the Supreme Court, over $15,000. Tell me, the legal costs of this must be monstrous for both sides, and then, of course, the court time as well. Who's paying for this? Is this legal aid? Because I can't imagine Mr. Tahei having the wherewithal to be able to fight this issue by himself.
I think Mr. Tahei was represented pro bono, but in the first two, before the tribunal and the High Court, he was granted legal aid for the Court of Appeal. Mrs. Hawkins was granted legal aid for both. It is a test case. The tribunal said that there's quite a few cases backlogged, waiting for a decision, so they need clarity. So again, if we're talking expensive, every single one of them has to bring a claim to see whether there was nervous shock or, it's going to probably grind the system to a halt. But it is legal aid. I've been very lucky. I've had people helping me pro bono on this because they find it really interesting and important. So it's one of those ones where you get all the resources you can and you pull them together, and people it drives itself. And
would it be easier if Parliament just simply amended the Act?